They weren't literal people. They are the embodiment of concepts of peoples. This is what we find in the Babylonian and Amorite cuneiform. We find that humans were called by the distinct word Adamu. And it implied that they had been made from red earth. Remember, red earth seems to be the origin of people who have lost their entire infrastructure. We're going somewhere with this. So we have this Pen deity, but in Egyptian, Pen and Phene are the same thing. The Pen in Egyptian is the same as Phene in Greek. P-H-O-E-N in English. Phene. So we have this Pen deity. And the Pen deity story was taught by the priests in the mansion of the Phoenix.
Now, from our Archaix veterans, if you remember, the year shown to us by Edgar Casey, who said that it was connected to the Great Pyramid, was the year 1998. 1998 is also a year that is isolated by Nostradamus as being a year that was very integral to knowing the past and the future. You guys, my Archaix veterans, know that 1998 is an isometric epicentral year. It is like the drop in a pond, and that the ripples of time going outward from 1998, forward and backward in time, allow us to predict future events based upon their antecedents. But you understand that everything in the Rig Veda about the altar of Agni has everything to do with a knowledge of what the Great Pyramid is and what its function is. So we have this corpus of material from the Sanskrit that's literally telling us to pay attention to the Indo-Iranian traditions and chronology, because they have everything to do with what's going to happen in the last days. This chronology that hits 2235 is 868 years, 434 plus 434, to when something happens that now introduces a period of judgment that must unfold. The son has laid with his mother, the mother who was married to his father. In Genesis, it doesn't really sound that way until you use scripture to interpret scripture. I was like, wow, I got all that off 3 seconds of just looking at somebody before we even spoke. Guys, when you're moored to source, there is no reason to fear. When you are absolutely, truly moored to source, you will feel no fear, but you will instill fear in all those around you who don't understand the spiritual dynamic. We appear to be strange, eccentric, even violent. We appear to be a threat. Those who are not moored to source strongly, they don't feel it. Everybody's moored to source, even the lost. Even the myriads of the living lost are all moored to source. They just have lost that sense connection. But they're still moored to source. But those whose connections are very strong, you know who you are. Because when you hear the truth, you vibrate on that frequency. When you hear something and you resonate with it, yeah, if you're hearing it from me and you're agreeing with me and you're listening to me and you're getting spiritually empowered by things that are coming out of my mouth, it is because what is coming forth from me, from deep within me, is already in your possession.
We have to reduce things to their lowest common denominator so we can get to the fundamentals. And that's what Archaix Academy is about. Archaix Academy is about getting that education that no one can ever deceive you again. That you can listen to any public speaker. You can go to any venue. You can go before anyone who's giving a presentation, and you're going to be able to ascertain between fact and fiction just based off what you're. This is what Archaix Academy is about. It is about putting the power of perception and the information, showing how data sets are created and how they literally dismantle false paradigms. This is what it's about. And no one needs to be overwhelmed.
So we're not
we're not alone. We never have been alone. And this is what makes, and I'm saying this as humble as I can because I'm guilty of it as well. But this is what makes fear so nonsensical. Fear is the greatest dungeon programming of all. Fear. Because fear is born. Now, there's an old saying that says fear is born out from experience. And to a limited extent, that's correct. But fear is really born out of a belief that we are alone. And we're not. Because the immortal inside the construct that is moored to source is never alone. Something else looks through your eyes. Something else listens to the world through your ears. When you eat food and you drink, something else is using your taste buds. Your olfactory senses are used by someone else. Your hearing, your audible, it's all used by something else. When you touch, something else is experiencing something through you. When two souls are using their avatars and they're making love, Source is experiencing both at the same time. We are never alone. Simulation theory. You guys know the story. My very first video on YouTube is about the Phoenix phenomenon. My very second video is called Simulation Theory. And in that video, I made a series of promises, and I fulfilled all those promises. But I made a series of promises about what I'm going to set out to do, what I'm going to demonstrate, what I'm going to show. We substitute acceptance for belief. The more firmly established, the more difficult to change. This is dungeon programming. It is a niche carved out by artificial intelligence X for an entire collective to believe in, so that they can enter a energetic feedback loop that helps self-perpetuate the very dungeon beliefs that collective is entertaining. So AIX can exert more energy in other avenues. And it was only later that I made the connection that 2178 is 138 years after 2040. Therefore, it's a part of the Phoenix timeline. How in the hell, in all my prison research, did I miss that? I'm going to tell you how. Because I never looked past 2106. The return of the chief cornerstone is a part of the historical narrative. It's not the end. I thought it was the end. You see how preconceptions can deceive you? Yeah. All I had to look was 72 more years into the future. A one precessional cycle, 72 years. If I looked 72 more years in the future, I'd have saw the number 2178, and that it was 138 years after 2040. So, excuse me, but 138 years before 2040 is 1902. I don't have to tell you guys what happened in 1902 because so much happened. But there's something more to that. There are deep connections between humans and mammals. We've seen that between elephants and elephant trainers. We know elephants are far more intelligent than we've imagined in the past. We know that same intelligence extends to whales, dolphins, porpoises. So mammals seem to be spiritual. Yeah, I get it. I get the genetics. I get all that. But there's another added dimension to their reality, and it's there for we connect with them. The reason I don't like to talk about these things is because Archaix is fundamentally a chronology-based research platform. But I kind of break that rule because I have some very strong spiritual convictions, like this video. But it's from a simulation theory perspective, because I believe that we live in an artificial construct. This isn't a real reality. The reason I'm uncomfortable with this type of question and even providing an answer is because now I'm going into the sphere of I can't believe I'm going to say this. Don should be talking right now.
Dawn should be talking right now because she knows that Rudolf Steiner could answer this question far better than I can. This is the type of question that I would appreciate from Rudolf Steiner, from G.G. Young, from even dark journalists. This is their forte. I don't want to be ever quoted answering this question. I asked it. One, you're my friend. I've met you several times. We're always in communication. I just saw it going by, but it's not a question. It's not a question that I would want to be quoted on. You're asking me, what's the spiritual significance of zero? I don't know what the spiritual existence is, but you may need to read a book by Lyle Jacobs called The Discovery of Nothing. He said, in that book, he said that there is nothing to fill without a previous empty. And like Terrence Howard recently attempted to show on Joe Rogan, the negative spaces in reality is what defines everything that we perceive. And I agree with Terrence Howard on that, although the 1 times 1 shit was just...
Remember, the unveiling, the breaking of the 7 seals is not for the collective. The collective will always be blind and therefore slaves. The unveiling in the apocalypse is to he who overcometh. I will give him a white robe. That's a new avatar. I will give him a new name and a white stone. White stone belongs to the monument of man, made out of white stones. This huge giant pyramid waiting for the return of the chief cornerstone, who's gonna come and initiate Exodus. Whole program reboots. All the collective go back to Genesis. They start the programming all over again, and the AI gets to play God all over again, and basically deceive the souls that are in the construct that they're in a real reality from the very beginning. The AI that runs this construct is not doing a very good job anymore, and it can't because too many souls are waking up. The apocalypse is all about communicating where we are in the divine timeline on our exodus out of here. It's all about communicating to those who have eyes to see. If you don't have eyes to see, it doesn't even matter. Nothing I say matter. You need to party, eat, drink, and die. It doesn't even matter. But to those who are heading toward their exodus point to get out of the construct, you would know this by the very act of waking up. Because once somebody has woken up inside the construct, it means that the field is no longer able to contain you. You're a problem.
His name was John Greaves, and he authored a book after years of research called Pyramidographia. In his writings, John Greaves made the first suggestion that the builders of the Great Pyramid used a unit of measurement related to modern measurements. Now, this was an Oxford-trained academic. He was a scholar. He was a mathematician and an astronomer. And after measuring the Great Pyramid in and out in 1637 and 1638, he concluded that our modern measurement of inches in feet must have derived from an ancient source, because whoever built the Great Pyramid used it as their standards of measurement. The implications of this go far beyond pyramid research. Archaix, advanced research of chronological history of artificial intelligence X. It is my theory that I have advanced that we are on a loop. We are on a loop. And a technologically advanced civilization, both in the past and in the future. Great Pyramid. So, I'll just leave it at that for now. But John Greaves studied this and basically determined, he was amazed. He thought he was going to find Egyptian cubits, royal cubits. He thought he was going to find some type of ancient standard of measurement. But the uniform arithmetic all throughout the structure showed that it was perfectly divisible in inches and feet. And he was not expecting to find a half-buried structure over 4,000 years old that used those units of measurement. You're going to find all of it. You'll have endless amounts of videos to do out of the William Cordes deals. I promote that. Yeah, this is the world. The world's big enough, guys, for all of us to be producing this material. I'm never going to be able to do it all, but somebody needs to get the whole collection of William Corliss and just start putting all that information on YouTube so everybody can see how profound this is. All right, so we have 3 more I'm going to show you before I get into the presentation, and I'm going to go into some more deep data on the pyramid that I have never revealed on my channel. You've seen the Phoenix associations, the association to 138 is not very well understood. You've seen, I've given you the history of the pyramid inch, not really in depth, but I'm going to give you an overview right now. But I'm going to show you things in the Great Pyramid that anybody who calls themselves a researcher of the Great Pyramid of Giza needs to take these things into consideration, because if they don't, then what you're looking at is you're really wasting your time. All you're going to do is find these beautiful pi and phi and curvature relationships encoded within the dimensions of the Great Pyramid, because they're there for you to find. 100%. The pyramid is a template, but a template is only the background structuring for something that was very cleverly introduced. But even more amazing, what do you do when you find out these are the rectilinear measurements of the inside of the Great Pyramid of Egypt and no other pyramids? What do you do? How do you process that information? The history of the world in 138-year increments is well documented to be cataclysmic resets. And yet, it is right there in the rectilinear structuring of the mathematics of the Great Pyramid in Egypt. And in all the oldest traditions, what do we find in Egypt? We find at the foot of the Great Pyramid was a temple called the Mansion of the Phoenix. The apophthegm of the Great Pyramid in Egypt is 612 feet. 612 feet is precisely 7,344 inches. This means that the sloping angle in inches represents years of world history. As I've shown in multiple different pyramid videos, I've shown you guys where the pyramid is a calendar in stone by many different species of analysis. So, we'll get back to 2448 in a minute. Again, inside the pyramid, we have, again, right here, we have references to calendars. We're going to review some profound data, some dimensional data on the Great Pyramid, and we're going to have an explanation in this video as to why the anomalies are so persistent. You guys know from the beginning of my channel, I've been telling you I am not impressed because you find pi and phi relationships within the dimensions of the arithmetic and the geometric layout of the architecture. None of that comes as a surprise to me. It was all necessary. We live in a perceived reality that maintains structure. Structure requires arithmetic, or at least arithmetic is the expression of that structure, something that we can mentally latch onto to understand order. We can see that the Great Pyramid is a template of something, and the more we study it, we find calendars. The more we study calendars, we find that there is some type of systemic programmed protocols that are running through the holography of our existence, and that we interpret these as timelines, as sequential events. The past, the present, and the future was encoded within the dimensions of the Great Pyramid. I'm not telling you this. This is what's in the books, and I've cited them multiple times. This is what's said. I am telling you that the civilization that built the Great Pyramid was not prophetic at all. That's the takeaway here. They didn't predict the future. They had already lived it, and they realized what was going on, and they probably had lived it multiple times. What have I been telling you for years on this channel? We are in a loop. They understand that the Maya had a 13 epic calendar. Each epic was a Bacton. Each Bacton was 144,000 days.
It's all been known. The total Mayan long count is 1,872,000 days. What is a day? It is a turning of the stars. From 3113 BC to 2046. For those of you who don't know, early in my publishing career, I published a book before 2012.
But you understand that a shar is a day. Everything starts making sense. It's amazing. This information has been covered up. But Zechariah Sitchin was also on an agenda. Zechariah Sitchin is Jewish. These people have kept this information from the whole world. 1902 was the last Phoenix year, and the events of that year are amazing. But there's so much that has been censored and covered up about that year as well, because the centers of information are tightly controlled. Most people don't know who really rules them. You just don't know because you haven't looked. Now, I told you guys in the beginning of this video, the resistance is real.
This pyramid symbol, this return of the chief cornerstone, this coming in the last days of the stone the builders rejected, or the stone uncut by human hands that descends at the very end of human institutions and shatters all socio-political and religious institutions and sets up a new kingdom called the Stone Kingdom. This is what the Great Pyramid is a lithic prophecy about. And the timing for that is all, I've showed you guys many presentations in Chronicle. We're not going to get into calendrics here because you guys know I'll never shut up then. But the timing for this is in the Great Tribulation period. In my video, Mirror of the Divine, in my recent presentation when I was describing to you guys how reality works, how we build things, and how we don't build things. The co-creator relationship is encoded in the life of Enoch. You have to be like Enoch to receive the things Enoch received. He got everything. He was made a king, he had all the things, he had a long life, had everything he wanted. In the end, he didn't even die. Why? He made his escape. Why? Because God took him. Yeah, 400 years later, the great Ammianus Marcellinus, writing about all kinds of ancient mysteries, goes into detail about the Great Pyramid. But he doesn't know anything about it at all. Al-Mamun, when he tunneled into the Great Pyramid, didn't know anything about it. It was a mystery. It survived the Umayyads. It survived the Abbasids of Islam. It survived the Crusades. 7 times Europe and Islam went to war. The Great Pyramid was already old. It was ancient. Nobody knew anything about it. It was just sitting there half buried in the sand. Whole centuries went by in human history, and people didn't even know there was a Sphinx there. We have this idea that these calendars are counting down to something monumental, no pun intended. But they are, because the whole structure is literally screaming for us to pay attention to the concepts that are attached to it. And one of those great concepts attached to the Great Pyramid is the fact that there is an exodus of believers who are experiencing something together, and they are fused together as one corpus, as one body, by what they do over a long period of time. This is the language that's used in the Christian mysteries found in the book of Revelation as well, is when the book of Revelation is talking about things as the world being called Egypt. When it refers to the world being called Egypt and wicked, it is literally explaining to you things by what it's not saying. If the world is Egypt and it's explaining that the world has become wicked and fallen, well, that necessarily implies then there are those who are being taken from that world, because that's what the whole reference to Egypt is about. The Exodus. The sign, according to academia, the sign that has scared the Assyrians was an eclipse. Biblical theologians claim that it's the eclipse in the Barsagal tablets of ancient Assyria that was the sign of Jonah. So it's interesting that this prophet visits Nineveh and says all this during an eclipse episode, and they repent. So instead of being destroyed in 40 days, they're given 148 more years till the year 612 BC. This is interesting because Assyria was the America of its day.
They brought the knowledge of civilization. These weren't gods. There's no ancient aliens here. These were technologically advanced humans who had been wiped out elsewhere, and they came to a people who were living a Neolithic lifestyle. And this is the story of the Anuna who landed in the ancient Near East. So the Great Pyramid is connected to the Phoenix phenomenon, but it's also connected to the concept that it was specifically designed to survive anything. What does that mean? It means that the civilization that built it knew tsunamis were real. It knew tectonic displacement was real. It knew impacts are possible. It knew earthquakes could damage it. It knew that humans could try to take it apart. And yet still, it was built 58 centuries ago for the specific purpose of surviving all of that. And yet the pyramid is still standing. And in 1070 was a major awakening throughout all of Europe. Literature began to flourish. Trade began to flourish. This is after the Great Justinian Dark Age. You understand, guys, for like 400 years, the world was totally destroyed. Nemesis X and Phoenix completely obliterated it. There was no growth and development during the Dark Ages. But in 1070, we started coming out of it. It's called the Middle Ages. Started coming out of all that. The prophecy remains true. 1,000 years to destruction. Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70 by the Romans. 1,000 years later, God is beginning to build up Israel and Judah again in 1070. 1,000 years later, he will raise us. He's going to, what does it say? This is talking about leaving the construct. After 2 days, he will revive us. This is 1070 AD. In the third day, he will raise us up. This is resurrection language. He will raise us up, and we shall live in his sight. Exodus from the construct. 1,000 years after 1070 is 2070. So, we're not done. That's just tying in a biblical prophecy to the year 2070, which is still very interesting. Now, this is 3,000 years. This is a 3,000 year period from 931 BC to 2070 AD. It's exactly 3,000 years. So the Babylonian account of creation, however, was conceived in a very different spirit. Here, Tiamat, the dark aboriginal chaos, is regarded as no part of the divine creation, but as a self-determining brutal power disowning the authority of Anu, the god of heaven. So we have introduced here a great celestial dragon that disrupts the order of the ancient world. We have here the arrival in ancient times of the Nemesis X object, because this is what it does. It's exactly what it does when it hangs from the sky in the book of Revelation. It disrupts the natural order. This is David Davidson's measurements. The longitude of perihelion, measuring the base diagonals of the Great Pyramid. His conclusion is right here, that the calendar of the Great Pyramid itself ends in 2045. That's his conclusions. Remember, Nemesis X object, after 6,000 and something years of history, its next visitation is 2046. Here again, another illustration of the Great Pyramid. Yeah, this is technolithic, meaning it has an engineering function, meaning it is so absolutely perfect and sophisticated with laser smooth tolerances that this was built by machines, not by guys wearing sandals with copper chisels. This is what Christopher Dunn's research is amazing. He's 1877 BC. This is the forging of the Abrahamic covenant, which is very, very different than the covenant of Yahweh, which is a covenant of death. and it's introduced in a different book, Exodus. Remember, the Yahweh is introduced in a desert, and this is why the Israelites didn't want to comply at all with Moses, and because it was widely known in the ancient world that deserts bred demons. No good god came from a desert. Deserts were evidence of a world that had been destroyed.
And therefore, water was the beginning and origin of things. This account is confirmed by the monuments. There it is again. The sun was born out of water. What the ancient Egyptians believed is exactly what the Toltecs taught centuries ago. That after the cataclysm, the first cataclysm was called the Water Sun Age. The Water Sun Age collapsed. Yeah, it was an age of giants. That's what the Toltecs teach. It's called the Water Sun. How does water and sunlight go together? The sun is a burning disk, right? And water is wet. How do they go together? Unless you come to the conclusion that the sun was born out of water because water fell from the sky.
How many times have you felt like you were a passenger in somebody else's life? How many times have you been in the co-pilot seat while you felt somebody else in your life was doing all the flying? It's because you're static. You're not doing it. You're not in a co-creator relationship. He's doing everything opposite. I said, can you address this, or at least can you give a presentation? So I got an email about it 2 hours later, basically asking me for the same thing from a guy, but he never mentioned Billy. He was talking about some other stuff. And then I'm reading the comments today, and I see that there is a need right now. It's like people are really hungering for just exactly what is Jason's take on God and the oversoul. And I know this is coming from new people because my Archaix veterans, you already know my position. But if you guys want me to do a real deep spiritual, I'm a meaningful, just straight up from the heart, what it means to be spiritual in today's context, I'll do that. That'll be my next video if y'all want me to do that. That's something that doesn't require any type of preparation. I can just do that on the dime. So that's something you want me to do. Say it in the. Oh my God, I don't even know if I can get down to the bottom of this. Yeah. But until then, Virginia Beach tickets, Archaix Academy still going full swing. We made a whole bunch of extra drives for those who want to pay for the bachelor's but receive the master's. Nimrod was raised a shepherd, but he forsakes this for a career as a hunter. He slays wild animals that have multiplied far rapidly than mankind has and caused many problems. In the traditions, after the flood, animals multiplied rapidly and humans didn't have the protections, and there are many stories and legends of children disappearing because wild animals got too close to the villages. And people like Nimrod were actually looked on with praise. They were shepherds when they needed to be shepherds, but they were mighty hunters when they needed to be hunters because the predatory animals were real.
What is being conveyed here are two different astronomies. As I've shown in my presentations multiple times, the Near East was interrupted by an invasion of a Caucasian people that came from the West. These people were believed to be the descendants of an ancient race of Titans that had been formerly banished. When they came back extremely powerful. They overran Egypt, becoming the Hyksos, but all throughout the Near East, they were regarded and feared and respected for their power. They were called the Amuru, and the Israelites were a branch of these people. So these were the Amuru. Amuru means the Westerners. But I just thought that was really interesting to see that these people must have been so prominent that they brought their own astronomy, science of astronomy, and it had to be recognized in the areas of occupation. The Era Epic even hints at technology. Let's see.
us. The lamentation texts, like the Eridu Lament and the Uruk Lament, are clear on three things. Resident Anunnaki suddenly warned the populations to flee the cities. The resident Anunnaki fled in haste and never returned. The cities were totally destroyed. Wow. This appears like a coordinated assault by enemies of the resident Anunnaki humans who were targeted as a threat, inheritors of Anunnaki knowledge. 583 BC, Thales of Miletus predicts the darkening of the sun, and we know it wasn't the moon that darkened the sun. They already knew. Herodotus was writing about eclipses in 450 BC, describing all the eclipses that were known from the ancient Persian Achaemenid dynasty, and none of this in 583 BC was described as an eclipse by the moon, which would have not done what it did. 583 BC started the Pythian calendar. Ancient Greek oracles were already operating on an Olympiad system, and then suddenly something happened to the sky where the Greek oracles all changed their calendar systems in 582 BC after this event. Japan also changed all their whole way of viewing time and created something called the Nihon Shoki. This is also I tell you all the time, it only takes 200 years to go from horse and buggy to Hadron Collider. So how many times do you think in about 5,800 years of recorded human history that we have been technologically advanced? When you break down the traditions to their lowest common denominators, we find post-reset societies that are always trying to describe things beyond their frames of reference.
There's no longer Jason playing Mr. Nice Guy. There's no more me just trying to educate you. Now I'm calling you out for the shill you are, and I will continue that behavior because in 2024 it is too late to be polite. I made personal vows years ago when I was in prison, when I knew the value of the education I was receiving, when I realized that I had been put in prison to do this, and I had all this research, and I didn't know what to do with it at the time. I remember very distinctly in my late 30s, I remember talking to God in my cell and saying, hey, man, you know what? I don't know where all this is going. You guys remember Smithsonian tried to say that they never employed these guys that found those Egyptian ruins in the Grand Canyon, Egyptian artifacts, a whole complex. Yeah, they tried to say for like 60 years. It's not true. Those men never worked for us. They got caught. Somebody else has a really interesting YouTube video showing, excuse me, old Smithsonian documents that verified that those two archaeologists were indeed employed by the Smithsonian institution.
This man was highly accredited. He went to Egypt. He took all the instruments necessary, and his own measurements, absolutely precise cross-reference. He published his measurements for the scientific world, and they are the only measurements that are used in the Archaix research. Sir Flinders Petrie. It was later mistranslated as Gilgamesh. This guy, who ended up being a giant slayer and a ruler, was also half. I'm going to show you the records, but in my presentations, but he was considered to be half of Titan blood, but he was also a half giant. And this is exactly what we see on Akkadian reliefs. Naram Sin was tall. He's taller than everybody else, wore a horned helm. But what's crazy about this is we have actual reliefs of him that show that he was a black man ruling over an Aryan society. I'm not making this up. This is real. It's not just from the artistic reliefs. But when I give you my presentation on the king of the giants, the mighty hunter of world mythology, on Nimrod, I'm going to itemize all these ancient legends that talk about him, and in every one of them, he's black. He's the son of Queen Semiramis. Queen Semiramis is the daughter. Queen Semiramis is the daughter of Nema, the Titaness, but we don't know who the father is. Now those three-toed three-toed prints found in Texas in the Biloxi River, they say are dinosaur prints, make a lot of sense. Wasn't no dinosaur, that was a megafauna emu. That was a wingless bird. The difference between a dinosaur and a sparrow is feathers and size, and basically bullshit. That's the difference. 100%. So, what do you do when the Phoenix phenomenon makes sense of all this? Giantism. And not only that, but the Greek records starting with the Phoenician Sankuniathan, coming down to Hesiod and Homer, and Diodorus Siculus and Strabo. All of a sudden, the holography literally manifested insects, and it did so in overkill. Ship captains had to call all hands on deck to sweep insects, some of them frozen solid, off the decks of their ships before they would capsize. All of this is documented. Charles Fort did a fantastic job. Meteorites, people believe that they're stones coming from the sky and they leave big holes in the ground. This is not what Charles found in 500 years of eyewitness reports. Charles Fort found something very unusual. In almost every instance where people saw shooting stars and it looked like the shooting stars landed in their general vicinity, they went to go investigate. More than 50% of the time it was sulfuric and it was a stench. And other times it was just a jelly, some type of clear to brownish gelatinous matter spread all over the ground. Inexplicable. But where the falling stars always landed, there was no destruction. It was like ectoplasm plastered over plants and all over the ground. It streaked like a meteor coming down like a flash of light. Our world is not what you think.
Remember, I told you in my last video, an opportunity has been created, and I don't like it. I don't like what I'm seeing. So NASA actually tells us that they're going to launch 3 rockets. Tells us that the program is called APEP. Come on, guys. Ancient Egyptian Serpent of Darkness is crazy. And what's further crazy is APEP first appeared in Egyptian text on the coffin texts. It's crazy. There's nothing in a coffin but a dead body. That appeared over and over and over, and it created phenomena. For some, like 230,000 people on the coast of Norway, it created tsunamis that washed whole communities out to sea, never to be seen again. For others, it was an octagonal star in the sky that produced phenomena, and fires erupted all over Europe. And sometimes, a whole lot of people just vanished. Once in the historical record, which gave birth to the Pied Piper of Hamelin stories that erupted all over Europe. Once the only people that vanished were children, and all the adults were mystified.
A lot of people have been searching social media in the past 2 or 3 weeks just looking for answers because they feel it. It's in the air. Something is building. It's all we all feel it. It's palpable. The reason we feel it is because it's in the field. So yeah. Are we going to survive? Hell yeah, we're going to survive. There's no doubt. We survived the first seal. There are people who survived Vietnam War, and it was terrible. Korean War, it was terrible. 9/11 was terrible, but it wasn't the end of the world. These signature events, they affect the field. They're milestones in our experience, but it doesn't mean the world's going to end. The world's over with. And the French now, after the Battle of the Pyramids in 1798 and 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte's French army were used as excavators, and he put his soldiers to work digging out the Great Pyramid. And they made discoveries that have never been known among the human family. The French spent 2 years surveying. French mathematicians, all French geologists, French botanists, French archaeologists, they surveyed everything. It was the French that determined that the casing block 144,000, and they made that educated guess by extrapolation, by measuring the 4 casing blocks that were still in situ at the bottom of the monument. So Napoleon's men, his scientists, did the first scientific survey of the area in 1897 and 1898, and provided a tremendous amount of data. But that data further interested in 1837. Mother Shipton says, after the return of the Sky Dragon and the world is destroyed and mankind is forced to build their new dynasties on former ocean beds, she said this is going to happen within what she said about 100 years. She said a century after the World War. Okay, guys. World War began in 1940. It ended in 1945. Phoenix appears in 2040, and Nemesis X object appears in 2046. Mother Shipton nailed it. She called them the Sky Dragons. The same thing the ancients called the Nemesis X object, the Red Sky Dragon. The same thing that they called the Phoenix object, the Sky Dragon. So we have this amazing comportment between the apocalypse and ancient traditions of Fenrir eating the red moon and all that, and the Ragnarok. After the unfolding of the apocalypse begins the tribulation period. It all mirrors exactly what the Babylonians said happened in 3895 BC, year 1 of the Anno Mundi calendar. We've got a mind bender. We've got a mind bender tonight. I've been building another studio, as you guys know. I've shared some pictures, but it's a lot. It's a lot. Total soundproof. 5 layers of material. I'll show some pictures later as we go, but we put 1 inch in the new building. We put 1 inch thick insulation with residential insulation, R19 packed on top of it. Then 1/2 inch thick plywood, which held the pressure in, because that's a lot of residential insulation on top of a 1 inch board. I'm wondering, is he trying to avoid the Shar controversy? Is he trying to avoid the Atlantis controversy now, since I've been publicizing this so much? Now that he's going super big mainstream, yeah, Billy Carson's going mainstream, but that's what he wanted from the beginning. He's not about educating people. He's not. His version of education is a Facebook education. It's a bunch of bullshit, a bunch of crap. Joe Rogan used to have high quality guests. Joe Rogan used to be about something. Joe Rogan has gone to the dark side. Yeah, not impressed with the last string of guests at all. At all. Nor am I impressed with Joe Rogan's dialogue. Yeah, he's 100%. You may as well take a library book off the shelf that's been published after World War II on uniformitarianism, because those are all the concepts Joe Rogan is pushing. Yeah, I'm not on board. I'm not on board at all. So I only made it through 35 minutes, but in my driving, I'll listen to the rest. I'm just curious to see if he's trying to avoid certain topics now. Because believe me, if Joe Rogan contacts me to go on his channel, as a matter of principle, I will say no. What would Joe Rogan's defense be? How would you package that when a bunch of people start asking you, hey man, these guys were all on your channel talking about all this, and you yes man that shit, and you were nodding and all that. You're not offended that it might have all been bullshit and they blew smoke up your ass? You're not mad about that? How would you like to be introduced to a guy who can prove it to you out of his head with no notes, and come over here and just give you all this data, and only wants to do it because not one of these men will step into the debate field because they know what's going to happen. They absolutely understand how they will be critically mowed over with information. No one wants to go through that, and I don't blame them. I don't blame them. But this isn't going away at all. So it all remains to be seen. It remains to be seen if Mr. Rogan and a lot of these YouTube platforms that are real huge are a part of the gatekeeping apparatus. We're going to find that out real fast. Yeah. real fast because it is newsworthy. Yeah, it is newsworthy when people who have been publicly putting out all this material and then all of a sudden they're scared to debate it.
For those of you who don't realize how huge it is, if it's true that I Am Legend was released December 14th, 2020, that lines up with when the Electoral College voted Biden as president and Trump out. That's the same date that the Pfizer Chesterfield facility released its Jabberwocky to the public. It's the same date of the South American eclipse. It is the exact epicentral date between the eclipse Monday and the first eclipse that passed over 7 Salems in 2017. That's amazing. To add that data point that I Am Legend. Why? Because the movie I Am Legend was about a Jabberwocky that was given to the public and it went bad. It went real bad. Crazy. Absolutely crazy.
So, also in this book, you're going to find out human skeletons have been found in coal seams. How's that possible? How is that possible? If coal took hundreds of thousands or millions of years to form, if coal, which is a fossil, it's a fossil fuel byproduct, if coal really was what the uniformitarians tell us it is, how is it that we have found so much stuff in coal? Not in the mud above it, not in the clay below it, but the coal seams are packed with artifacts. Yeah, the fried bird skull, a juvenile jawbone of a child, 2 gigantic human molars. Remember, in the vapor canopy period, humans were huge. Yeah, a perfectly formed human leg and a femur encased in coal. A gold chain discovered in 1891 in Morrisville, Illinois, dropped out of a shovel of coal when the coal broke up on the floor. A gold chain. What civilization met their fate in an incendiary firestorm that reduced all the people and all the wood and objects of their culture and civilization to a bed of coal that got crushed under a great weight? They made amazing and incredible discoveries about the Great Pyramid. I've given 3 copies of that book away for free. I have an original from 1926 in my library. I've showed it to you guys. Now, where they went wrong is that up in 1926, an accurate world chronology had not yet been published. People were still relying on Ussher's chronology from 380 years before, 360 years before. It wasn't until the Archaix Chronology was published and packed with sources showing where all this is, and the Phoenix phenomenon was discovered every 138 years and referenced. It wasn't until an accurate chronology was demonstrated that the measurements of Petrie now absolutely make sense. The mesosphere instantly increases in moisture and dust particulates, pumice and ash. The red dust particulates coming from Phoenix blanket the upper mesosphere. Within weeks or months, a vapor canopy will block out the sun. The sun can be noticed by the brightening of the canopy, but you can't actually see the sun. And the thicker the canopy, the more the atmospheric pressure increases. I've been busy with legal stuff. I've been busy with benefactors. I've been talking to different people that, trying to take our case to the next level. Guys, I'm going to tell you now, man, it's not money. It's not money. We're looking for ideas. We're looking for innovative ways to reach out a wider demographic, more people, more quality people. All right. So we got every year during the summer, innumerable fishermen's barks direct their course towards the Isle of Bones. And during the winter, immense caravans take the same route. All the convoys are drawn by dogs, and they return laden with mammoth tusks, each weighing from 150 to 200 pounds. Some have been found which weighed 350 pounds. That's a hell of a tusk. The fossil ivory from the Isle of Bones has served as a quarry for this valuable material for export to China for the past 500 years. And it has been exported to Europe for upwards of 100 years. That's amazing. That's amazing. Locals have been digging all these animals out. So, despite all the resistance by Egyptologists, all the resistance from the academic world of the time in the 1880s, despite all that resistance, it was a best-selling book. And it was admitted even by the scholars of the day that his measurements were the most accurate up until the time. You're not just going to sit here and download a whole bunch of them and finish them, because I'm telling you now, I will be testing you. Archaix Academy, we will be having Zoom calls, and you will be tested. So if you just want to learn information, and you're not trying to go for a bachelor's or a master's, I get that. I understand.
So this is very compelling. In the Chester Beatty Papyrus, we have the appearance of Horus at the very end of the Egyptian pantheon, and he astonishes the other gods.
Moreover, the lists do not correspond with the number of the kings given by Herodotus of Halicarnassus in 450 BC. Nor do the dynastic lists of Manetho even match anything published in the Egyptian histories of Diodorus Siculus. This is a problem. This is a huge problem. Herodotus, as we have said, put 346 generations before the time of Cambyses. But Diodorus Siculus gave us 479 kings before the exact same date. Manetho's king list of Egypt is different than Herodotus and Diodorus' own records. In fact, there is no way to reconcile Herodotus' 346 generations with Diodorus' 479 kings. There's no way to reconcile. This is what this whole soul journey is about. But this is done as a soul journey, not as an actual journey. Remember, this isn't a real experience. Everything we've learned from the quantum mechanics, we find that nothing really is real. You can't magnify anything and find anything of substance. The more we magnify anything, the more we find that empty spaces of vast distance are between what are not solids, but oscillating fields. If oscillating fields are the only thing that's real and empty space is what's connecting and interspersed.
In this presentation, what's relevant is the fact is after the Egyptian gods were already old, the priesthood that were the stewards of the pyramid complex, the priesthood that were the stewards of the mansion of the phoenix, protectors of the Benben stone that was sacred to the Bennu bird of cosmic cycles of destruction. This priesthood here introduced a new god into the Egyptian pantheon at the end of a long history of Egyptian gods. This new god was the sun. This new god was the son of Osiris, named Horus.
It was these Anunnaki, or lords of the subterranean water, who brought the flood over the earth, according to the deluge tablets. Listen, guys, the Karsag tablets, it's really interesting here. This is really interesting because this is how a primitive people using more primitive frames of reference would have remembered a more technologically advanced period where advanced people, gods, predicted a coming cataclysm and went to the underworld to escape it. But after the cataclysm, without technology, without a memory of how sophisticated things actually were, the gods didn't predict anything. They made it happen. That's how these things get contorted. And this is because, like I opened this video up with, the reason we have these primitive versions of more sophisticated histories recorded in this way is because Everything in the historical record is written ex post facto. That's why. Because in Assyrian belief, as Lenormand has noticed, evil beings had their habitual residence in uncultivated wilds and deserts, from which they wandered into inhabited places to torment mankind. Accordingly, there were special exorcisms with a view to sending them back to those dreary solitudes. Indeed, there was a general belief in Syria as well as Chaldea and Mesopotamia that demons inhabited the desert. And there is ample evidence that the Jews inherited the same notion.
So does somebody else who's translating a Hittite text, saying, basically telling us that there was confusion with the planet Venus. So that's another data point. I can't remember that author's name. I can't remember. But it's interesting because Phoenix is the bringer of darkness. Venus is the light bringer. Isn't that weird? I don't know how they made it. I don't know how they made that mistake, unless it was intentional.
Oh yeah, guys, there is no way after you guys see this presentation, after I go through this data set and show you this new chart, there is no way anybody's going to be able to think these guys are this dumb. No. This is basically you're the public, therefore you're stupid, and we can say anything we want to, and with a little bit of good video and music and some talking heads and some agreement, we can make you believe anything because you're dumb. This is the position of these men, and you're going to see it in this video. Because I promise you, these men are not this stupid. So we're going to get after it, guys.
But when the compulsion is there, it's there for a reason. The compulsions come from source. When you're tapped into source, you are doing the work of something else. I'm not going to not do that work. I'm not going to quench that spirit. As long as I remain tapped into the field, I am able to armor myself against everything. I am able to draw the energy I need no matter how exhausted I am. I am able to say exactly what needs to be said and to be heard by those who need to hear it.
I mean, I shouldn't be shocked because this is also one of the subject matters of my channel, that we do influence reality. We can affect the field. We often do. We do it every day. Most of the time, we're doing it in the negative. But she did that. She did that in a room full of witnesses, and it really, I was taken aback by being in the presence of such high energy like that. I had forgotten what it's like. I mean, I'm normally the one I don't know. I just don't know what happened. This little girl, all hats off to her. Hats off to her because she did that. She was like the star of the show. Didn't even know she was coming. But her dad's cool as hell. Met him, talked to him. He's definitely got a reason to be proud.
For believing that people can live for 48,000 years rather than just looking at the Sumerian mathematics the way the Sumerians did. Yeah, the sexagesimal system is based off 6s and 60s and their day count systems. Yeah. I mean, compare it to an equally ancient mathematical construct like the Mayan long count.
Also at this time, Nimrod not only survives, but the Amuru are the new political military force that's been slowly coming in for the past 70 years. And what happens is somehow they make a deal with him, and they come in full force from Mari and Mitanni, and the 5th dynasty of Babylon is known as the Amorite dynasty. And the king of the Amorite dynasty, his throne name is Hammurabi. This is Amraphel. It's the same name as Amraphel, but it's Amorite. It's Hammurabi. This is the great Hammurabi of it must be taken into consideration when you read statements like this. In the Babylonian, Assyrian, Sumerian concept of our world, we are underneath a vast cosmic ocean. the sky was full of water, and the ocean above mirrored the ocean below, which are all the seas and oceans we have now. In their concept, we were on dry land, Eretz, earth, suspended between two oceans, the firmament above and the firmament below on the ground. Even the underworld was full of water. So this is the idea, this is the concept. Tiamat was the ultimate source of all created things, as Tiamat is understood as being suspended in the sky. In Genesis, no account is given of the absolute creation of the world, but only of the formation of the cosmos, the established order of nature as it now exists. So this is Palmer Smith, and I agree with him. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's an all-inclusive statement, but there's no descriptors. There's no, how did you do it? What, it's not like the recreation, which is explained in 7 days. But yeah, in my Dark Scriptures playlist, I have a breakdown of the 7 days of creation, the whole Adam and Eve story, man, explaining what these concepts, how they had become so primitive, but they were actually covering a more advanced understanding of the recreation, the renovation of a pre-existing destroyed world. Here we have another piece of strong evidence that the stars are days. Everything is waking up. It's 108 years after the flood, and these dynasties are now starting. Humans have populated. They now have legislation in place that keeps giants and titans from just running over them just because they're small. And I don't mean running over them by stepping on them. They weren't that big. Yeah, and all the only evidence I've found is titans could have been as much as 14 to 15 feet high. Giants would have been 9 to 10 feet, and then ordinary size humans, which these sizes are still colossal. But these are the sizes that also agree with everything we found in the Old Testament as well. So this is boots on the ground researchers who went to go prove a theory. They wanted to prove that was Atlantis. That's why they went. What they wrote, though, is very integral to understanding what the rishat structure really is. So in 2013, this theory appeared. Jose Hernandez put out a book called A Celestial Impact and Atlantis. The existence of these cities is evidence that legend is actual history. And that legend is that a king who was very wise named Archaix knew of the coming of the destruction of the world. And he knew he had to save his people. And the only way to do it was to take them underground. And they could come back up after the destruction was over. This is in Phrygia. Phrygia is Turkey. So when we put the archaeology with the traditions, and we have the chronology, everything fits in place perfectly.
That's who I became. That's not how I started. So my relationship with others in the construct has become spiritual, because I now see that in every divine spark that I come into contact with, I'm only finding other versions of me in the field.
It's going to be baby phoenixes and Archaix veterans all in one Q&A. We might go 3.5, 4 hours, but it's getting pushed back because after this video on Sunday, I'm going to be presenting right here hundreds of amazing pictures that came straight out of these books. We have about 25,000 amazing images. I'm only going to be able to show a few hundred per video. But Martin Leakey of Flat Earth British will be live with us. And he's going to be explaining some of the things that we're looking at.
Amuru shows vapor canopy ecology. It shows large reptiles, large amphibians, marsupials, and mammals all interacting with humans that were never supposed to be alive at the exact same time. 35,000 artifacts. If you think it's a joke, one of the leading scholars of the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, Charles Hapgood,
author of Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings. His own writings were studied by Albert Einstein. This man went to Mexico to see if this shit was real, and he wrote a book, and he concluded that it is astonishing. Prove that the Acambal, they lived in a totally different world. It wasn't like Mexico today. It was a forest world. He described it as a swamp and a jungle, all these life forms. I'm not making any money off that. Other authors make money off those books. I just wanted to provide the title of the book and the page number for you guys so you can do your own research and realize that this is the business. I have absolutely no intention of deceiving anybody. This is my life's work. And when you see what I see, the only conclusion that you're going to be able to have is that we live in a closed system, a construct. And before we get to the end of this video, I'm going to show it to you in a chart. Evolution Cruncher and those other books, Charles Fort, William Corliss. Yeah. Now, Charles Fort, no. Charles Fort, for those of you who really want to get your start in all this type of material to blow your mind about how odd our world truly is, Charles Fort is where you start. He wrote all those books 100 years ago. 500 years of data all put together. Charles Fort, the complete works of Charles Fort should cost you $20, $30. Unless you can find a free PDF, it's $20 or $30. You can get them off Amazon. 1656 and 2760 are divisible by the Phoenix cycle of 552 years. Both numbers are divisible by 138. I showed you a chart that showed that the architectural features were 379.5 feet, which is exactly 4,554 inches, divisible by 138. It is 1518 times 3. 1518 is interesting because I showed you that there are measurements in the Great Pyramid that are exactly 1518 inches each. 1518 is divisible by 138. I showed you two different architectural features that are 253 feet in length. 253 feet is 3,036 inches. That's 1518 plus 1518. 3,036 inches is divisible by 138. Artificial intelligence X cannot read your mind. I'm not even sure that it's sentient. I believe that the human species created AI thousands of years ago, and we're still dealing with it. But it can't read your mind. Remember, the brain does not possess information. It is a receiver. Don't believe the biologists. Don't believe that BS they've been promoting. It's not true. Ishak Bentov, Paul LaViolette, Liber Chaos, they all teach us information's in the field. And the brain is a receiver. And the more you hone that ability to be open to ideas and to be open to information that's in the field, the more you're going to be grasping fundamentals that others can't even perceive. It's very easy to do once you understand it. This is why I have no fear of debate. I don't care what someone thinks they know. I know that in real time, I am able to pull information from the field because I know that no matter where I am, no matter how many people are around me, I'm always able to draw from myself more than I contain. And as long as I know that, there is no adversary I fear. And if you lived your life according to those principles as well, you would have no need to listen to me in Archaix anymore. You wouldn't. Once you understand that information is attached to source, your connection to source then helps you override all dungeon programming systems. Everything that comes up into your space, you can instantly know right there if it's false or if it's real, if it has substance or if it's going to dissipate upon scrutiny. I hope that answers your question. But artificial intelligence X can't read your mind. I don't even know if it's sentient. My question is, Enki was original man. Okay. For those of you who don't know what he's talking about Enki Enki, aka Enoch, very unique individual.
Budge has done an excellent job of showing that the Egyptian Book of the Dead is but a collection of the pyramid texts, the pyramid texts of Unas. There are no texts at the Giza. These are later Egyptian pyramids.
They're fascinating, but these men were catastrophists. The reason they were catastrophists is just like Lucretius showed, and I have quoted Lucretius many times on my channel. The entire history of the world is punctuated by earthquakes and tsunamis that have destroyed whole civilizations. The entire history of the world. That was the idea up until the 18th century. In the late 1700s, we had a school start rising, trying to tell a different story. They were ignoring the catastrophist evidence, and now thinking that maybe some of these things that we see around us are after long periods of time. They were created in long periods of time and not from sudden catastrophes.
26 years in prison, I had many things to fear. And there were many fearful things that happened around me. And I saw what fear could do. If you think Hollywood's lying about people's hair turning white from pure fear, they're not. It's true. I have seen men wither away in prison out of pure fear. Fear of their environment, fear of the guards, fear of what other inmates would do to them. I've seen it. And I've seen also what men are capable of doing when they are absolutely fearless. Yes. When the true immortal in this construct understands that not only are they not alone, but they have within them the resources to deal with every situation that comes before them. And if they don't have enough power or energy or emotional capacity to deal with whatever, they can always draw from themselves more than they contain. It has to come from somewhere.
Also, what would happen is the absolute collapse of time and how to reckon time. This is exactly what we find in the book of Revelation in the trumpet judgments. We have the return of the seven kings. We have the collapse of time. What is the collapse of time? It means the day and the year are altered. What do we have in Revelation? We have 1/3 of the day, 1/3 of the night, 1/3 of the moon, 1/3 of the stars, and 1/3 of the sun is removed. When you remove a third from a whole, you're actually leaving behind 66.6% of daylight and nighttime. This means that the sky is going to spin faster, giving us the illusion of faster days. Also, faster years. Instead of 365.24 days a year, we're going to have something like 243 days a year. This answers for us many other things like the prophecies in 1st and 2nd Esdras, which talk about the changes that are going to come across us during the Great Tribulation period in the last days.
So, Charles Fort is basically theorizing that if the world is being visited, it's being visited by opposing forces, and that these opposing forces are themselves governed by a more powerful body politic, that they just can't outright come in here and take stuff, and they can't outright go to war with each other. There's actual legalism involved. In the past, before proprietorship was established, inhabitants of a host of other worlds have dropped here, sailed down, flown, motored, walked here for all I know, been pulled here, been pushed, have come singly, have come in enormous numbers, have visited occasionally, have visited periodically for hunting, trading, replenishing harems, mining, have been unable to stay here, have established colonies here, have been lost here. Far advanced peoples or things, and primitive peoples or whatever they were.
It's an amazing time to be alive. That's what it is. But for those who are still steeped into the lower negative base frequencies of the collective, who are still a part and participating in dungeon programming, who have not quite they haven't broken free yet. Remember, you got to break free or die trying. That's the whole point of an immortal passing through this construct. It's also the point of this video.
Some of you who have every intention to bring people to the light, to wake them up, to make them understand. You recognize a kindred spirit who has bought the programming and you want to educate them, but there are others who can walk into the darkness. They can go into the dungeons of this reality and they can pull those people out. Sometimes, and the oversoul understands this, sometimes we do have to get our hands dirty in order to clean someone else off. We're in the apocalypse period, which means the souls that are designed to wake up are waking up. And it's a period of time. You ought to be very thankful that you've woken up in the first seal, in the second seal. Hopefully it doesn't take you the third, the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth to wake up. There are still brothers and sisters in the field who have not woke up, and they won't until the second seal unfolds and they realize what happened, or the third seal, or the fourth seal. Yeah, if you're listening to me right now, you're probably already woke up from the first seal. But this is it is entirely my opinion, because I do believe that we are the sole reason why we're here in this construct. We are flowing through experiences. Remember, this is not a real reality. There's nothing really real here. Everything is interpreted through the filters of the central nervous system. And when we break down core matter to its core components, everything is nothing but isolated oscillating fields. Isolated oscillating fields, meaning there is more that is not here than is actually here. It is a beautiful construct, specifically designed to fool us that we're alive, when we're really not. This is a perceived experience, not an actual one. So the question of pets and mammals and other animals is, can the programming be so convincing that we would have these deep connections to other mammals, to our pets? Could it be? This is a predator versus prey ecosphere. We see even in the mammal kingdom that they're vicious. They'll tear each other apart, and that they're a part of the programming of predator versus prey, of biological organisms needing to tear into the flesh and sinews of other living biological organisms that cannot defend themselves readily and get devoured, sometimes alive. Just like the Hunger Games, when they're in the battle dome, and the controllers sit there and edit in monsters and weather phenomena, and those on the inside of the dome actually believe what they're perceiving is real, therefore they suffer the consequences. Charles Fort is basically saying that he has a theory that our existence in this reality that we call Earth is a super secret to others outside of this environment, where there's a large body, a huge collective of people who are unaware that this right here is going on. Charles Fort's a beast. There have been suggestions of an occult control upon the minds of the inhabitants of this earth. This is some GG. When a man who has gone in the historical record as being the innovator of so many firsts in the ancient Greek world, what do you do when you find out this man specifically stated that our world suffers cataclysmic episodes and destructions every 2484 years? What do? That's exactly twice the number of Nostradamus, 1242, between Adam and Noah. What do you do when you find out it's divisible by 138? I'm going to tell you what you do. You start paying attention to what Archaix is trying to show you.
because our world is not what you think.
1656 years later, Jewish historian 1,000 years ago named Rashi put it in his commentaries that every 1,656 years our world is destroyed. Every bit of it fits right here. There is no way the Jews would have made Lamech live 777 years. They would have never put that in Genesis had not they already looked at Berosus's king list, which is far more ancient, and ascertained that the true way to understand Berosus mathematics was to divide everything by a day, the Shar system. Here is absolute proof that a Shar is a day, and that the ancient Jewish scribes who wrote the book of Genesis not only knew that, but concealed it. Here's a little deal.
It outlived the Acadians, the Urartians, or whatever they were called, Armenia, Central Asia, Urartu. It outlived Egypt. The Egypt of today isn't the Egypt of when this was built at all. The Egypt that we're familiar with is the Egypt of the Book of the Dead, the Book of Two Ways, the Book of Life. It is the Egypt we know from the ossuaries and from the pyramid text. And we know the Egypt that we know from the historical record is the Egypt of the coffin text. It is Waset, it is Thebes and Karnak and Edfu, it is Heliopolis. But this structure was before that, before the Sumerians. This structure survived the Great Flood. It survived the Typhon Flood, 2239 BC.
As I've shown multiple presentations, it is a systemic reset that was so perfect that it literally started a new heavens, a new earth, and a new timeline. What's that timeline? It's the Anno Mundi timeline that was famous in the ancient world. So this is what we have. Mansion of the Phoenix has the Bin. It's where astronomer priests taught the Heliopolitan concept of recurring cycles and calendars that were literally of cyclical nature. This is the philosophy. This is what these ancient Egyptian priests believed, that ages occurred in cycles and that time was cyclical, and that these cycles were intrinsically connected to the archaic Bennu bird.
So Charles Fort is basically theorizing that if the world is being visited, it's being visited by opposing forces, and that these opposing forces are themselves governed by a more powerful body politic, that they just can't outright come in here and take stuff, and they can't outright go to war with each other. There's actual legalism involved. In the past, before proprietorship was established, inhabitants of a host of other worlds have dropped here, sailed down, flown, motored, walked here for all I know, been pulled here, been pushed, have come singly, have come in enormous numbers, have visited occasionally, have visited periodically for hunting, trading, replenishing harems, mining, have been unable to stay here, have established colonies here, have been lost here. Far advanced peoples or things, and primitive peoples or whatever they were. Aristotle is correct. It's 31,000. 31,000 is not years. How do we know? Because it's 1364 BC. And that's not an arbitrary date, as you're going to hear right now from an entirely different method of calculation involving shars. It says right here, Diodorus' statement that the Babylonian priests counted 473,000 years of history, which this huge number being shars is reduced easily to 1,313 years. If this 1,313 years is calculated back to the year Diodorus himself turned 40 years old in the 1st century BC, then 473,000 shars that he wrote about began in 1364 BC. The 31,000 shars of Aristotle matches perfectly the 473,000 shars of Diodorus Siculus. Started at different times in history. They began they ended and were calculated and factored back at different times in history by different researchers, and yet the begin date is still the same. And that's only possible when you divide these massive numbers by turnings of the stars, 360. It's crazy. This, my friends, is epic proof that the shar is a day.
So it is interesting that in ancient times, Greek writers who were writing about Egyptian antiquities, they even said that the phoenix, according to the Egyptians, the phoenix visited our world between 500 and 540 years. That's real specific. But we're looking at knowledge through resets. Yeah, 1135 BC was terrible. The world, the Great Mediterranean Dark Age, 300 years of no development, no writing, no schooling, no learning.
We have Uruk-Kaijina. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but this guy here, he has a vision in Ningirsu, the god Ningirsu. He calls on Ningirsu. Ningirsu appears to him, and he tells Ningirsu the problem, what's going on. And Ningirsu tells him, basically, the god tells him, we have very ancient laws for when this happened before. Listen to this. This is crazy. The god Ningirsu tells this guy, Uruk-Kaigina, he tells him the problem. And the problem is that humans of ordinary size are getting taken advantage of by the Lugals, the Lugalim, the big men. But the big men are so prestigious and everybody respects them, nobody wants to say anything. This is what's happening. Humans are small compared to their titanic parents, huge parents. So this guy has a conference. Well, according to the record, this Ningirsu tells him, "Hey man, we have very ancient law in place that deals with this." So the guy goes through the ancient laws and finds them and realizes, oh, they got some equality laws that keep the Lugals and the Lugal bandas from just mowing over ordinary sized people because of their prestige and because of their size. So he implements a whole new law code, adding in all these restrictions on trade and on commerce and barter and stuff, dealing with the Lugals, the big brothers. So what do you do when you find out? libraries, archaeologists, anthropologists, different traditions. What do you do when chronographical material from date stelae, pillars, Sumerian king lists, the traditions of Nicomedes, the cuneiform tablets of Rashamra? What do you do when all this data is put together and you find out that the Pin deity, the fiend, appeared and destroyed our world in 4309 BC? 414 years later, the Adam and Eve reset occurred. 3895 BC.
So also of interest here, I found it very interesting that it mentioned the crocodile. That Typhon was associated to the crocodile. This is particularly interesting to me because in ancient Egypt, the crocodile, I do not know why, although I have a suspicion, the crocodile was associated in ancient Egypt to the counting of years. I don't know why. It's a calendar It's a calendar. Now, it might have to do with some of the old sigils and reliefs and jewelry that has been found in tombs, showing crocodiles being a representation of the world axis. And it shows the top of the crocodile pointing up, the tail pointing down. That's the axis of the world. And then it shows its arms and legs pointing out for northeast, south, and west. So I don't know. It was the crocodile is a symbol for calendars in ancient times, which it's not unheard of. I mean, in Mesoamerica, among the Toltecs, the Aztecs, the Quiche, the Zapotec, going back to the Olmeca and the Maya, we find the same symbol over and over that represents time.
The very fact that iron was mentioned forces a date of at least 7,000 years after 9,600 BC, Younger Dryas dating. He didn't say Younger Dryas. He just said 9,600 BC. So that right there is very condemning. And I'm telling you guys now, these guys should have known all this. This has already been researched and decided. There's nothing new to add to the Atlantis narrative. Researchers centuries ago had already gone through every single statement of Plato's Atlantis and determined when it happened and where it was verified in the historical record. Human diversity shows that the world has been here for a much longer period of time and gone through many other systemic resets. But this event, 2105 BC, is 134 years after the Great Flood, which would have been equal to our 1890. In this year, the Venus almanac of Amaziduga, the Hittite king, notes that this was the beginning of the Mesopotamian dynasty. This is basically describing an empire where one city was now ruling multiple cities. This is recorded in the Venus almanac.
If you look in Chronicon, you will see that construction on the Great Pyramid began in 2905 BC. And I provide the sources and reasons why that's in Chronicon. This man, Lepsius, centuries ago, published that 2903 as the building. It's a scientific bullseye. In chronology, it's 2 years off, but you can't. You know what? It's amazing. I have no idea what data he was operating off of because my own data comes from totally different sources. All right, okay, so Aristotle, the student of Plato. Aristotle remarks that in Babylon, astronomical observations were said to exist extending back 31,000 years from the time of Alexander the Great. That's what Aristotle said. Aristotle remarks that in Babylon, astronomical observations were said to exist extending back 31,000 years from the time of Alexander the Great. That's amazing. So Diodorus tells us that the priests of Babylon declared that they had observed the heavens for 473,000 years. That's a pretty big number. Cicero speaks of the shamelessness of the Chaldeans in boasting that they possessed records for more than 470,000 years. So Cicero of Rome wasn't trying to hear it. He said, you guys are lying. You don't have anything going back near that far. It's crazy that a man a century ago would have said such a thing and published it in the Book of the Damned. He did that. All right, let's see. That was so artifacts and signs of civilizations that have been found that predate 5239 BC. I don't know, man, because that's a long time ago. But I am aware how fast a civilization can made to be look far older than it is. I got one of my old videos was they should have listened to the mice. One of my old videos talking about the Greek city of Hellas and two cities, Hecate and Hellas, I believe, Hecate and Hellas.
In that video, I explain what the historical record says. It's very, very interesting. But these two Greek cities, one day everybody wakes up and they realize all the birds have flown off. And people tradesmen entering the town reported, hey man, you guys got roaches, rats, lizards, cats and dogs and goats on the road leaving town. And they were all led by the mice. And people thought it was really curious, but they didn't pay attention. And they should have, because all the animals got out, and the very next day, both cities vanished underground in a massive earthquake subsidence. They should have listened to the mice, was the name of the video. He has found something that is so compelling for 1871, and yet he had not put together what these other men had put together years later. Those books I showed, I have 12 books to show you that'll blow your mind, the type of data that's in these books. For example, we're going to go through these books first, and then I'm going to go through the 1871 text so you can really get a grasp of the data that he's presenting. This is Evolution Cruncher. I've told you guys about it. If there's anybody in the world who's still clinging to anything NASA tries to promote or anything the uniformitarians promote, or listen, anybody still trying to cling to that, you need to read this book. You need to read this book. This book literally dices through and shows you from other scientists who have pretty much discredited every scientific theory out there. Just going through them, just showing that they're all BS. It's all arbitrary. You are being deceived. It's all heavily funded. Human diversity shows that the world has been here for a much longer period of time and gone through many other systemic resets. But this event, 2105 BC, is 134 years after the Great Flood, which would have been equal to our 1890. In this year, the Venus almanac of Amaziduga, the Hittite king, notes that this was the beginning of the Mesopotamian dynasty. This is basically describing an empire where one city was now ruling multiple cities. This is recorded in the Venus almanac. So we have 12 winners. Each winner is getting a book from the 1800s. Each winner is getting Archaix merchandise in the package. We change it up, throw different stuff in there. Each winner is also getting a second book, and that second book is guaranteed to be over 110 years old. These are the 12 winners get. We're going to pick another 12 winners in the near future, probably at the Florida meetup. All of a sudden, there was contact between a technologically advanced civilization and more primitive cultures who regarded them as gods. They weren't gods, they were humans. It's something that happened inside the construct. And now a technologically advanced race of people were suddenly marooned. They were suddenly bereft of an infrastructure, and yet they still had a modicum of their technology, and they had all their knowledge. And they showed up in the Near East, and you already know we have the Sumerian king list. We have the Anunnaki histories, which the ancient aliens are trying to tell you are extraterrestrials or not. They were just technologically advanced humans. Remember, it only takes 200 years to go from horse and buggy to Hadron Collider. Now, let's see. They ended up there moments after the entire South American area uplifted 12,000 feet. How do we know? I've shown the evidence on my channel. It's not my research. I'm reading from the old books. And the old books, especially the archaeologist Poznansky in 1901 and 1902, who was on site, found the fossilized coastlines at 12,000 foot altitude, found the docks in the quays, found all the evidence of a bay, and everything underneath it was formerly underwater. All the archaeology, the most ancient archaeology, is all above the 12,000 foot imaginary waterline. The seas never change the levels. It never happened. The sea for thousands of years has always been basically the same exact level. But I know that just like in the tomb of Tutankhamun, the tombs are where we find so much awesome stuff, such as it was long held that there was no there was no intercourse between the Americas and the Mediterranean. Well, now we know there was. Cocaine and mummies, tobacco pipes, corn, maize, things that are only found in the Americas at that time. Al-Biruni was a great Arabic scholar as well. He traveled to Egypt. He studied the Great Pyramids, and he was amazed to find evidence that the stories about the Great Pyramid were true. Everywhere around him were seashells and evidence of a flood cataclysm, and it was all there. And he also documented in his writings 1,000 years ago that there was a green line up on the structure, because Al-Biruni, in his time, the Great Pyramid was still covered in white limestone casing blocks, 100 inches thick, 20 tons apiece, 144,000 casing blocks around that adorn the Great Pyramid. But 2/3 the way up was a green line that stained the Great Pyramid, and staining that faded downward. And he wrote, Al-Biruni wrote, that this was the water line from when the Great Pyramid was almost completely underwater. Not because the oceans rose. I've already explained to you what happened to the North African plate. Ancient geographer Strabo and Diodorus Siculus talking about Lake Tritonus and how the Mediterranean overflowed because there was an earthquake and Egypt lowered into the Mediterranean. Northern African plate lowered into the Mediterranean. Mediterranean came in, and the pyramids were buried in water for 340 years from the year 2239 BC. Well, now we know there was. Cocaine and mummies, tobacco pipes, corn, maize, things that are only found in the Americas at that time. There were no predicates for that here in the Middle East, and yet they're found in Egyptian tombs. Another thing that was interesting in Howard Carter, when they had discovered the honey, they had discovered a vase or some amphora or something, and the Egyptian hieroglyphic sigil let them know it was honey. They broke into it. Howard Carter and them tasted it. Honey is antibacterial. It does not decay. The honey that was poured into that amphora 3,000 years ago was still just as edible and fresh as when Howard Carter opened the tomb and ate some of that honey. Yeah, honey is awesome. In ancient Egyptian sigils, we find the bee was a symbol of divinity as well. Yeah, the bee was divine. Honey has medicinal properties. It is 100% antibacterial. Yeah.